So when I started to explore my gender about 6 years ago, I noticed that the online trans community largely considered themselves communist, which we have now seen basically go mainstream and has simply morphed into those who identify as queer. That's not a coincidence. So welcome back to the channel today, everyone. We made it. This is part 3 of my 3-part series on queer theory. But before we get started, today's video is sponsored by the Tuttle Twins Educational Books. In a world where teachers seem to prioritize teaching wokeness to your kids, you have to take your child's education into your own hands. The Tuttle Twins have books that teach them history, sound money, personal freedoms, and more. Use the link in the description and get your books today. As well, save on gas with the Get Upside app, link and code in the description. So first I'm going to break this down into what the difference between Marxism and Neo-Marxism are. Because Marxism is basically a simple political and economic system, where Neo-Marxism uses the economic system, but it combines it with postmodernism, intersectionality, and critical theory to influence culture into a more communist society. At its end state, Marxism is a collective society where everyone works towards the common good. You can look at the video I did last year on political labels for more on where Marxism fits into the political spectrum. Now, neo-Marxists believe that there are two classes of society, the elites and the working class, which we're actually starting to see this division in society today, are we not? It's not necessarily left versus right, it's the elites versus the working class. I mean, there are members of the World Economic Forum from both major political parties, left and right, all across the world. And the work of the Economic Forum is the organization pushing for this New World Order and Agenda 2030, also known as the Great Reset. So then you have us working class folk who are set to fight against each other to achieve their political ends. I mean, just look at how the people that made the COVID restrictions, they didn't abide by their own COVID restrictions, did they? Again, they are the elites, we are the working class. They believe in two classes of societies, the haves and have-nots. Now, I don't believe the majority of those that are subscribing to queer theory understand how they are being used in this fight. They will call the Great Reset a conspiracy theory, even though it's very overwhelming evidence out there, even though the World Economic Forum calls it the Great Reset, and they are just being used as pawns to create and sow this division amongst the two sides. They are being used to deconstruct the societal norms of a dominant culture with those of the disenfranchised, whether that be race, religion, or sexuality. And this goes all the way back to the basic definitions of postmodernism, as you've seen trend throughout this entire series. And remember what I spoke about with Libby in regards to tradition, as well as the link between queer theory and CRT. It's all about equity, not equality. I mean, y'all, I recently put in a job application, and it asked if I identified as trans, but then it asked me my sexual orientation, to where there is no reason a potential employer needs to know who I prefer to sleep with. But when you look at it, that's equity. See, they can't force you to tell them, but in order for them to give preference to queer people, because unless you tell them, there isn't any way for them to know so that they can move you up this list. Now, what's really interesting about these questions is that there used to be a concern that companies would use them to deny employment to the disenfranchised. But now we know they're being used to give preference to oppressed classes. Now, switching directions back, traditional Marxists do still believe in biological sex, as it is needed for procreation in order to be able to continue the species forward. Now, in a postmodern society, in a neo-Marxist societies, think about my video about Charlie Kirk and about talking about transhumanism. At the time, I didn't really understand Charlie's point. But as I've dug deeper into this, I've started to really kind of notice a little bit about what he's talking about. But now think about this. In a neo-Marxist world, we would either have our babies grown in an incubator, or our brains would simply be connected to a modem and we would live forever, kind of like in one of those Black Mirror episodes. But all of this explains a question that I have asked on those Reddit boards very early on, which is, why did they think communism would be good to trans people? Nowhere in history have the LGBT been treated well under communism. And the answer is because they think they're going to be the ones in charge. They don't see how the elites are using them to deconstruct society. Maybe a select few will be part of the elites, but highly doubtful. I mean, when we see how they talk about marginalized groups, they generally espouse this bigotry of low expectations. They continue to say that minorities can't do things as well as everybody else. Even the infamous slip by Joe Biden.
Poor kids are just as bright and just as talented as white kids.
Or using the term punching down, when for that to be accurate, you have to think of yourself as less than elites, working class. But if there's one thing I want you to get out of this video, they are trying to break down society in order to build back better, so to speak. And queer theory is just one of the tools that they are using to implement this agenda. We can talk about CRT, you can talk about how they've used COVID, we can talk about the breakdown of the supply chain in the US, we can talk about the gas prices rising, we can talk about multiple other areas. So queer theory is just one piece of that implementation that they are shooting for in order to break down the society and so that they can build it up into this new world order, Agenda 2030. But with that, make sure you let me know what you guys think in the description. Click that like and subscribe button. Make sure you go support our sponsors and follow me across all social media platforms, and I will see y'all next time.